Hey, myeticket, this is Chris Bradley talking to you about what you said to anti-revolutionary about the Lucan census. No one disputes that Augustus ordered various censuses, but your hypothesis starts to fall apart when you mention Josephus. Josephus does talk about the strained relationships between Augustus and Herod the Great, but he never mentions the Lucan census. Fairly strange, isn't it, that the abrogation of Herod's authority by Augustus doesn't even make it into Josephus. Indeed, such a violation of sovereignty by Augustus doesn't get mentioned by anyone. This is the single biggest unresolved flaw in the first video that you have of the 3 or 4 or whatever you put up. The reason why the Romans had client kings in the first place, after all, was to free up imperial administration. It would have been unique if Augustus had interfered with Herod's authority in that manner, and thus noteworthy, but it was not noted. Then you also mentioned that the Romans did interfere with client kings. Well, the institution of a client king was an interference in the first place. But you mentioned that Augustus ordered tax reduced in one of the client states that were created after the Herod the Great's death. But none of Herod's children ruled as kings. They ruled as ethnarchs, not kings. And of course, it is the interference of Augustus in the taxation of Perea that was indeed noted, not his presumption of interference in Herod's kingdom. So your argument again is weak. You say a lesser interference was noted, but a greater interference was not. Interestingly enough, though, one of the people who never mentions this Lucan census was Matthew. Not in Matthew. But honestly, that's not even the problem with the Lucan story, is it? Get to the real problem with it later. And for me, the Quirinius issue isn't even that big. After saying that the Roman census in Herod the time great was a Roman census, if it was a census, it would have been a Jewish census under Herod. And then to quibble about Quirinius is pointless. It seems to me obvious Lucan story is a fabrication created to justify why Jesus was in Nazareth, or was not in Nazareth, to be born in Bethlehem. You repeat again, he could have, it's probable that, it's possible that, it's likely that. You say these sort of words over and over again. But the truth is, there's no reason to believe that Quirinius was there if one discounts the biblical story as kind of unique, which it is. Of course, since the Romans wouldn't have conducted such a census anyway, the whole matter is kind of moot. And like I said, it's pointless to discuss where Quirinius might have been in an event that didn't happen. You also said that at one point that Luke was a good historian. That's pretty funny. My favorite example of how bad historian is in Acts chapter 4 when Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin arrest John and Peter and question them. That's the same Caiaphas who crucified Jesus, right, in Luke 22 and 23. But he doesn't remember that, apparently. So he picks these guys up and he's like, what authority do you act on? And they talk to him about Jesus and he's like, oh, you're ignorant, right? But you'd think that all the hassle that he went through not too long ago to get Jesus executed would have stuck in his mind. Apparently not. But then you talk about the Egyptian census, and now, my e-ticket, you have merely descended into lies. I will read the whole document. Gaius Vibius Maximus, prefect of Egypt, declares, the census by household having begun, it is essential that all those who are away from their homes be summoned to return to their own hearths, so that they may perform the customary business of registration and apply themselves to the cultivation which concerns them. Knowing, however, that some people from the countryside are required to our city, I desire all of those who think they have satisfactory reason for remaining here to register themselves before Festus, the cavalry commander, whom I have appointed to this purpose, and those who have shown their presence to be necessary shall receive signed permits in accordance with his edict up to the 30th of the present month. They're told to return to their homes, not their ancestral birthplaces, and we're told, they're told to go where their property and business are, not where they're not. As you repeatedly say, the primary point of a census is taxation. You don't tax a person based upon what is in their hometown. You tax them based on what they're doing now. And this would have been huge, too, because I don't know if you understand this, but one of the common ways that the Romans colonized a particular area is by settling veterans of the legions in that area. And so you had tens of thousands of Romans in any given year, in just 1 year, who might be settled in some place like Gaul, even though they were originally from a place like Syria. And having a rule that said they'd have to go to their hometowns would mean that literally, an entire legion worth of people would have to leave their homes in Gaul and travel thousands of miles to Syria to register there. It would have been a logistical nightmare of epic proportions and not even serve the function of taxation. This is extremely important because their homes, their livelihoods, their money, and their property would be in Gaul, which is the primary reason why you level a census. So it would have been pointless for Caesar to have done this, Augustus Caesar to have done this. It's crazy. But, they're told, but that document, furthermore, is a refutation of what you say. They're told to remain home, if they're already home, to be at their hearths, where they live, for the purposes of taxation. To not travel is what they're told. Okay? That's very important. They're told to not travel, to go home and stay there until they're registered. And in the 119 census document, the person is asked to give his hometown, not to go there. There's a huge difference between naming your hometown and going there. And that's all that the 119 census document says. It says, he was asked about, the condition of his teeth and a scar on his face and where he was from. Not required to go there. And at that point, I stopped watching you because you had gone from your long list of caveats, might have, probably, could have been, possibly, plausibly, which you repeated dozens of times, to excuse the lack of documentation from bizarre census to outright misrepresentation and lies. You should be ashamed. Ultimately, though, what you do is replace proof with speculation. Again and again you say plausible. Could it have been that Quirinius was ordered to Herod's Palestine to conduct a bizarre census that would have required hundreds of thousands of people to move around the empire at ruinous financial cost and disruption? Well, there's nothing to stop Augustus from having done this other than common sense, but history shows that rulers do a great number of very stupid things. But it's not mentioned in any legitimate historical source. Oh, sure, there was a census in 8 BCE, and sure, Quirinius was in the area. But the specific narrative created by Luke, the bizarre travel requirements, for instance, the imposition of the empire in this fair, are not recorded outside of Luke. And even though many historians wrote about Palestine during that time period, this is one of those examples of the way that Christians abuse history. Rather than being satisfied with what facts we can collect, they're willing to create bizarre hypotheses and say it's plausible, even when the overwhelming evidence refutes the biblical narrative. Yes, it could have happened the way that it says in Luke, but there's no proof of it happening the way it says in Luke. As evidenced by myeticket's innumerable uses of the words plausible and might have been and probable. So, your refutation of the original point by anti-revolutionary is very, very weak, especially when you descend into outright deception and lies.